Well, Bergdahl not seeing any jail time now for deserting his post in Afghanistan. You remember he was 5 years held by the Taliban, and the argument was that he put himself in that position. You know, he's the only U.S. soldier who was captured and held by the enemy, the Taliban, during the entire Afghan conflict, which ensues even today. Not one, just him. Military judge today giving Bergdahl what he calls a dishonorable discharge. President Trump blasting the decision as a complete and total disgrace. Former CIA operative Mike Baker. Mike, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I think you used the word apoplectic earlier. I think that stunned, shocked, surprised. Look, just a few days ago, I was in a conversation, and I remember saying, I guarantee that Bergdahl will get some prison time. I never imagined he would get life sentence. That was, I don't think, was ever going to happen. But I was certainly thinking 5 to 7 years. Something to account for the fact that he deserted. He abandoned his post. He put his comrades, his brothers in arms, at risk. And yet, apparently, that played no role. And I get the idea that, OK, he suffered at the hands of the Taliban for 5 years. But you know what? He did it because he deserted. So it was his own doing. And I think that there had to be some prison time. And I just can't figure out what that judge was thinking.
You know, I don't know. There are many who get a dishonorable discharge. Retired General Joaquin was telling me sometimes you can get it for jaywalking. I think he was making an exaggeration to make a point that this hardly the scarlet letter that it would have given everything that's associated with Bergdahl. So he could still make, I assume, movie deals, book deals. There could be an enormous fortune awaiting him in recounting or showing this story. And I think for the guys who were behind trying to rescue him, free him, to say nothing of his comrades, that's got to be a double kick in the teeth.
Oh, it is. No, absolutely. It's completely galling. And you know, I think there's no doubt that there's some folks out there who view this as somehow a victory. They're probably the same people who view Edward Snowden as a hero. But look, this is complicated. I get that. And there's a variety of issues here, right? But at the core of this story, he deserted. Now, some people will say, well, look, he was mentally unfit perhaps to even have been accepted into the Army. And that's true. Back in 2006, he washed out of basic training for the Coast Guard. And so you could argue, well, how did he then 2 years later get into the Army? Well, remember, we were ramping up our activity. Right. And so, people would argue, I think, on that side, would say, well, so it wasn't his fault. But he's still functioning. He knows right from wrong. He pleaded guilty to both counts. And so it is stunning. I think that, who knows, maybe the judge took into account this idea of his how mentally fit was he for military service? Maybe he took into account the idea that he was held for 5 years.
I'm paraphrasing here, Mike, but he did say, all right, he spent 5 years, with the Taliban torturing him or whatever. I'm not going to throw a guy who was in a cell into another cell. But that seemed to fall on deaf ears from many military types I talked to today.
Well, and it should. It should, because, again, at the core of this, I get it. I'm sorry he suffered at the hands of the Taliban, but he did it because of his own actions, because he deserted. And maybe I'm living in a different world, but I used to think there were consequences for actions this serious. And maybe we're not. Maybe we've adjusted our culture and our society, and it's all part and parcel of this idea that, personal responsibility doesn't matter much and consequences really aren't what they used to be. But look, again, I'm not saying he should have been thrown into prison for life. No. But how do we justify this?
We swapped 5 terrorists for him, 5 Taliban militants. Right.
5 senior, absolutely, Neil. Right. That's a very important point, and people forget. 5 mid to senior level Talibans, including the fellow who ran comms, the fellow who ran intelligence for the Taliban. We gave them back, and those individuals.
A lot was swapped and traded there. Mike, thank you very much.
They're back in the fight. Thank you, Neil.
Right after this.